Hugh, thank you very much for joining me.
No problem, Tiki.
I didn't...
Oh, thank you.
Round of applause. There you go.
They're a much more generous crowd than the television crowd.
Okay, so Hugh, I didn't hear a lot about trust this morning, which I suppose quite surprised me. We've now got a review, the first in the world, by our regulator into FANG. Do we actually need it? Is the pendulum swinging back with trust into traditional media? Where do you see it?
Oh, look, I think we do need to talk about, and I think at a regulatory level, understand two fundamental things. You know, we have trillion-dollar market cap businesses that have entered our market that are competing for advertising. And in two senses, I think, real issues. One is what is their contribution to our industry? And, you know, not that I necessarily expect much from them from a creative point of view. I think that's for all of these people in the room. But in a sense, how are we able to at least use those platforms in a way that we can extend both the content relationship and the advertiser relationship? And to the extent that we're inhibited or even worse, prohibited from doing that, I think that's a real issue that requires analysis. And then on the second front, you know, this notion that these platforms are dumb pipes that take no responsibility for what goes down the pipe. Well, once you're a trillion-dollar company and you're basically building your business on your ability to generate revenue from audiences, a lot of that audience is coming in from content created by third parties. Yep. But you're also then providing a platform for all other sorts of crap. And to not take responsibility for those pipes, I think, is an issue.
Do you see regulation coming for a company like Facebook, both elsewhere in the world and here?
Well, I think it's a very active discussion, and I think there is, you know, we see it now very really for some of our people. The skin creams that are constantly appearing on Facebook associated with our people. It's a social harm. It's doing damage to our people. It's doing damage to our business. It's damaging for the community because the community has learnt over many years to trust those people for what they've presented as independent journalists or presenters or whatever it may be, and then to be presented with a fake skin cream and for no responsibility to be taken until some action is taken, I think is a real problem and something that needs to be addressed. So
Hugh, you've had your head around where money flows to in the ad world. You've got a really good sense of that, I know. In the world I cover, I'm looking at flows going from retail funds in super into industry funds in super at the moment, and that is all about trust and revelations in a royal commission. Do you actually see flows now moving back in a big way, ad flows?
Yeah, well, I think part of what we did in television with Think TV and part of what you're doing with NewsMediaWorks is about one fundamental thing, which is, and trust also relates to effectiveness. And we as an industry need to do a much better job, I think, of communicating to the audience the reasons why they should engage with our content, because it's hopefully quality. No one sets out to make crap, certainly not in this room. So hopefully quality content that engages an audience in an environment where the audience can trust what they're receiving, that should lead to an engaged audience, which should lead to the best advertiser outcome. And this notion that you trade media based on a cheap price is, I think, the other thing that's starting to come around. So you think about trust with an audience, then you think about trust for an advertiser. What does an advertiser want? They want a return on investment. So using...
So what did you think of Vanessa Clifford's profit ROI?
Well, using CPM as the sole analysis for how to base investment decision, I think it's a relevant factor, but it's not the only factor. At the end of the day, what you want is return on investment. And return on investment comes from a quality environment with an engaged consumer who is in an environment where they're reading and they're engaged and they're seeing messages. That is where you want to advertise, and we know that delivers effective outcomes. So how we move to that over time as an industry and how we communicate that to the broader market, I think, again, is a challenge for us as business leaders that we have a responsibility to do, so we can continue to invest in the content because it's not cheap. That's the problem. We have to invest in content that's going to create that environment. So trust at both levels.
Yeah, exactly. So going to the measurement from your point of view, looking at the marketing departments, particularly now you've got newspapers, particularly say in the publishing world, how those marketing departments in the last 10 years have changed. The in-house ones, I asked this earlier, have expanded. There was this great idea, there's a lot of investment in clicks, not a lot of understanding granularly of quality of that. How do you think that's changing? Because it has been extraordinarily frustrating for editors, content makers.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But there is a reality to it as well, which is you have to also accept that all those platforms do have a role in a modern marketing context. And they can be very effective in a one-to-one marketing message, or if you want to have a hyper-local community, or you want to connect with a social community, they can be great marketing platforms for that purpose. But I think we, again, as an industry need, and I take part of the blame for this, and I think all of the media owners in this business, in this industry should also take that. We need to do a better job of communicating exactly that message, which is, and communicating that to our people, which is, you know what, we create an environment that provides an effective marketing environment and therefore an effective return on your investment, and that's the basis on which we should be looking at our businesses.
How much respect do you have for social? And I ask that, for example, in the context of what's on the front page of The Australian today, the power of social, sleeping giant, pressure on my organisation, Sky News. Where do you see that debate?
Well, look, there's a whole bunch of aspects to it, but I think the one thing that I will come to on that, let's leave aside whether, because I do believe advertisers, in what I'm saying, should effectively think more about the environments in which they're deciding to communicate their messages. So who's making those decisions in those companies? What information is going to the senior leaders in those companies about the environments in which you're communicating your messages? Coming back to, if you have a brand, thinking about what about those brand values relates to what media might enhance those brand values to what might be the best environment to advertise. So I do think advertisers fundamentally should be thinking more about that, but we need to make sure that there's transparency and clarity around how those decisions are being made. To the extent that there's misinformation or social media is used to misguide or mislead or misinform, I'm not so great with words, the market, then I think that has an issue that needs to be brought to the fore. And again, that's part of the problem with social media. It is easy to use it as a platform because there is no responsibility in one sense, often, because it can be anonymous, as to who is communicating what message and why.
Well, and how many people. I mean, in this particular case of Sleeping Giant, there doesn't seem to be very many people behind it, but...
And we react.
We
give it a lot of air when sometimes we should not.
Okay, well, I'm sure it'll be given a little bit of air later as well. Let me move on to the huge deal that you have done with Fairfax. How do you see your overall business now?
Well, I think everybody likes, and to a degree, people like to overestimate one aspect of it, which is we're acquiring into a newspaper business or a radio business, whereas I look at it a bit differently. I think what's our role as a business? We are part advertiser supported. We do have a subscription business developing in Stan, but fundamentally we're an advertiser business. So the message that we've been talking about this morning and I guess the strategy for us as a business is how do we as business leaders create the best marketing platform for advertisers to connect with their messages with an audience in an environment that involves quality content, whether that be television, radio, digital or print or newspapers. How do we do that in a way where we provide a really effective marketing platform and compete on a scale basis? Because one thing that Facebook and obviously YouTube has as well is they have large scale in terms of their impressions. Now, if we as media businesses are able to position ourselves to compete on scale across a multi-platform environment, and in an environment where we've got what they don't have, which is quality content that an audience wants to engage with, then I think we have a great chance of growing our business. If we grow our business, we grow our revenues, we can invest in more content that creates that virtuous cycle. So for us, it's just about extending that marketing platform that we can bring to advertisers that should bring more revenue to the business, that should support investment in content.
I realise on this issue we're all singing from the same hymn sheet here, but you've now got.
I know, I'm preaching to the converted, which is always great.
You've now got mastheads, which we heard earlier. Well, actual brands now that are very strong in this country. You've got television, which we've heard this morning is now the most effective way to advertise. Putting those together, that's quite a powerhouse.
It is a powerhouse, but it also, I talk about it as a marketing platform, but then you've also got to understand what are the individual components of that and have a real discussion. And again, I think this is something we need to do more of, is what is that particular brand, masthead, platform good at? What are we telling the audience why you should engage? Like, why come and watch television at 7 p.m. on a weeknight? Why buy the newspaper? Communicating those messages to the audience is going to become very important, because in a world where you've got a lot of confusing messages and, where there are issues around trust and what you can rely on. I had a great example the other day. My daughter was trying to buy a visa to the US. She's trying to get an ESTA, and she went on a Google search, and I looked at the Google search, and all of the results gave her a visa. But it wasn't until the second page that she could get the $10 one. The first, page and a bit were $100 visas. Just people adding marketing basically to get $100. So when you've got that trust environment, if you can create a quality environment that the audience can trust in, that they know they're getting quality content, whatever that is, where that brand, whatever that is, whether that be the Sydney Morning Herald or the Australian or the Financial Review or Channel 9 or 2GB, you know what you're good at, what that means to an audience, what that advertising or that marketing environment means. I think that's, clarity and simplicity can be hard but very important.
We've heard also that digital shouldn't be seen as some sort of bolt-on, that digital is, it's a platform, it's not a type of marketing. Is the right structure in an organisation to have digital departments? Is that the way? In
terms of advertising or content?
Both.
Well, I know from I'll talk, and again, we're not yet. We've got, 3 months or so to go before we can hopefully get to the stage where we conclude the Fairfax deal. So it's premature for me to talk with too much knowledge about an industry I'm just coming to. But I know from a television context, digital is a distribution option. Our content, reformatted and restructured, but provided to a digital audience, so an audience that chooses how to consume a piece of content. You know what that is? That's actually incremental viewing. So if you're an advertiser and you can go on that journey, you've got to stop looking at the CPM of the original journey and look at the effectiveness of your message across multiple platforms. So
do you see yourself as a madman or a maths man?
A little bit of both, I think. I think, I've spent a lot of time dealing with mad people, and...
name names?
God, where would I start? Hundreds of them. But I love that. It's kind of what makes the texture of this industry really interesting, is the ability for, people with a passion, and we don't all have to be the same. We can all be quite different, and we should celebrate that. But a lot of them are pretty mad. So I love that bit, but we have to apply a bit of data and science to the way that we turn that into a business. So it's the meeting of madness and math. Maybe that's a new term we'll go with.
Good, so TV, mainly, I suppose. Local content. How is that going, and how do you who's going to make it and in this country, and where does the financing come from?
Yeah, well, it's going to be made by local businesses. It's what an audience is engaging with. Again, it gives you the ability to, in a digital world, to control the ability to distribute that content over multiple platforms.
Do you see it growing?
We are investing more in local content this year than we did last year. We invested more last year than we did the year before. And that's where we're getting success in our business.
And it's attracting the advertisers?
And it is attracting the advertisers, again, as we get better at understanding how to use that platform as a marketing platform for advertisers. And that task we're nowhere near the end of that. We're about to have a whole session next week with my senior team around, the way that we continue to innovate our platform so that we can provide better opportunities for advertisers. Because at the end of the day, then my role becomes how do we generate business and business revenues that we can provide to the content teams to maximise their audiences that will, again, go back to that virtuous cycle. So what everyone often asks me, what keeps you awake at night? How do we generate more revenue to create more content?
Just jumping around a little bit, the News Corporation has just frozen its sale of regionals, maybe having a bit of a rethink. Where do you sit there in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think understanding what you're good at as a business is really important. When I look forward for us, what we're really good at is, I would think, engaging with national advertisers on a national basis. That's where our strategy will play out. I think going forward for our business, that will be very much the focus. Does that mean there will be some re-looking at potential parts of the Fairfax business that we hopefully we end up being part of if the merger is successful? Yes, and we're having those discussions with people. So,
well, you've had a few, obviously, questions around ongoing independence of journalism, people's jobs. Do you want to sort of sum that up in a little bit?
Yes. Yeah. No, look, again, you want great people who create great content. That needs to be invested in. That's a fundamental principle of our industry. And that needs to be celebrated and recognised, because that will go to the environment within which people will know, I'll advertise with that business because of beyond the brands to the people that represent those brands. I think it's fundamentally important. So independence of that creative process from influence either for commercial outcomes is really important, number one. And from a business sense, we have to run a business. There has to be a business environment. At the end of the day, we're not government funded, we're funded by revenue. That's a reality, people recognise that. Getting those processes right is important, but the independence of quality and people, enabling people to do their jobs is how we need to operate. Yeah.
Last one from me for now. Yeah. You're coming together with Fairfax post these rule changes has really shaken up the whole structure of the media landscape. Equally, as I say, through the organisation I work for, that's to become a joint venture between News Corp and Nine. Can this lead, in a world of we're ever more vigilant about cost cutting, to some clever ideas for everyone to save and become a little bit more efficient? Now, we're already sharing, for example, printing presses between News Corp and Fairfax. In the UK, I think I'm right in saying, is that they sell advertising, NewsMediaWorks sells advertising on behalf of all, a little bit. Could that happen here? Could that happen here jointly?
Look, I don't know what you'd have to look at each particular thing and what the ACCC restrictions are, but I think there's one thing, which is it's a new competitive environment, and people often pitch that stuff as cost saving. Well, actually, what might happen, hopefully more and more, is just that you're finding an efficiency in one place to get a better result in another place. So again, what we've done in our television context, and I know this isn't the meeting for it, but we've reduced cost where we weren't getting a result and allocated that investment to places we are getting a result. Now, within that, we're still a business, so we have to run a P&L, but that is the process which will be constant, and that will involve cooperation between some bedfellows that 5 years ago, 2 years ago, may not have cooperated, because we find in ourselves and those relationships an understanding or a broader opportunity and the ability to bring reach to a successful outcome. So yeah, it's actually a fascinating time to be running a media business in an environment where relationships are the same as they've been, but are also changing, and what you can turn that into in terms of creating opportunities like the Your Money channel. And again, Your Money channel is an exercise, again, when you come back to the CPM thing that we started with, right, which is don't use CPM as your only analysis. Use return on investment. What does that mean? Well, this is where the advertisers say, well, you're just trying to hike the price, Hugh. But if you can increase the price in the context of delivering a better result, which might mean more than just above the line advertising, it might mean, you know what, digital means you can go to lead generation. So if you can provide qualified leads to an advertiser, well, they're going to be very grateful for that and prepared to pay a higher price for that. So I think Your Money is a great example of two media companies going, you know what, we can combine our reach to an outcome that hopefully should provide a fantastic marketing platform that's probably different to the way that we approached advertising in the past.
Well, I'm into that. Right, now, does anybody have a question for Hugh?
You've spoken a lot about advertising. How about subscriptions and the way that they play into the newspaper model? Do you see a time when newspapers are predominantly funded by subscriptions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a thanks, Jenny. It's a really good point, right? So, what is the revenue model that's best suited to the business, the individual asset, or that you're involved with? And in the case of some of the high-value newspapers that are in this market, there is a model that involves not only just advertising but a growing subscription base. And why will, that comes down to the value proposition. Why should I as a consumer pay something for that experience? Well, if I'm getting something that I think I'm getting value for, I'll be prepared to pay that. And that developing in our industry and in the community is something that we're seeing more and more of. So I absolutely think in some cases, some of the businesses will weigh more heavily towards subscription than they will to advertising. Absolutely.
And what about the Guardian model? Do you think the donation model will survive?
Well, it just comes down to value for money. Do I, as a consumer, feel that I'm getting value for money for what I'm contributing to that? And if I do, it will have a chance of survival, absolutely.
Okay. Another question?
On the long-term viability of newspapers, you've got a bit of experience of dealing with Google and Facebook. You're about to inherit some subscriber-driven newspaper models at Fairfax. From what you've seen and heard, and based on your experiences running Channel 9, are Google and Facebook doing enough to help papers with subscription models? They generate huge, or rather we generate huge audiences on their platforms, but it's very hard to monetize them. Are they doing enough? And who's doing a better job, Facebook or Google? No, they're not doing enough, nor are we, right? I think as an industry as well, we went into this in digital environment thinking how fantastic is this, we can reach an audience, but we left the business model at the door. And I think it's incumbent upon us as much as them to find a solution to what that means for the future of our businesses and for our content. I think who's doing it better? I absolutely think Google's got a better model to do it. They are, particularly in our case, certainly embracing models that enable us to monetize our content on their platforms. So, that's a great start, and, we're going to continue to talk to Google and make sure that we can make that model work as best as we possibly can. And I think Facebook is well behind. And we still find examples of, our ability to place content, which makes it a great distribution platform and ability to reach an audience, but a prohibition on our ability to monetize that audience, which, as I understand, that's their business model, that's fine. But I think in the context of where we are, they've got work to do to meet the publishers and enable us to continue to prosper and for them to prosper from how we embrace their platforms. Thanks, Hugh. Just a quick follow-up question on the printed newspaper. It'd be good to get your thoughts on its value and long-term viability.
Yeah, well, I've had to double down on my attention, obviously, over the last little while on newspapers, and just thinking to myself what it is about that experience, for me as a user, first of all, before I go to a business model, about, what am I enjoying about that experience? When does it suit me? And to sort of have a bit of time to think about that before I have to launch into the cut and thrust of the business of that, I'm quite enjoying. And it's a pretty good experience if what you get when it lands on my driveway, at whatever ungodly hour in the morning, when we open that up on the weekend and I see how my family consumes the different parts of that paper in different ways and what each of those people in our household are getting out of it, it's kind of, you start to get an appreciation of what it is in terms of part of your lifestyle. So how we market that to consumers as an industry, I think a bit like we've done in television, a bit like you're doing in NewsMediaWorks. I think there's opportunity there that, you know, just for us to tweak that messaging and really embrace what it is about that experience that's great.
Okay, we have one more.
Are you seeing any difference between your relationship and the spend from direct advertising clients compared with agencies?
As Nine, we're not. You know, our business is still very much weighted towards agencies, and I include independent agencies in that mix, who are a big part of our business. Obviously, I'm anticipating as part of the merger that we'll have an increasing part of our business which will be direct. So, you know, I think that presents opportunities for both sides of the business in terms of embracing the agency strength and the direct strength from other businesses. Yeah. If that's the question.
All right. Cool. Well, that is perfectly to time. So I'd like everybody to join me to thank Hugh Marks very, very much for our discussion. Thank you. Very nice.
Thanks, Susie.